We actually won the second licence in December 2000, but by May 2001, I'd lost 300 members of staff out of 800. Because while I was out there fighting the judicial review, everybody else was out looking for another job because they thought we'd lost, which was sort of fair enough. And the people I inherited were battle-scarred and weary. We'd lost all our creativity and innovation, and the company needed a change. And if you'd have talked to me at the time and said, can you change culture overnight? I would have said, no, I don't think you can. When I'd been at Woolworths earlier in my career, I'd been partly responsible for their cultural change programme. And to be frank, it was like trying to turn a supertanker because it was so embedded in the woodwork. At Camelot, what I learnt was, if you've been through a crisis, as we had when we thought we'd lost, then people actually want it to feel different. So the question isn't, can you change culture overnight? The question is then, can you sustain the new culture? So we put a massive amount of investment, both in terms of finance, but also time, and created this new culture at Camelot called Winning Ways. And so now as an organisation, we're totally unpolitical. I won't have politics with a small p at all. We've got a real can-do mentality. We're very innovative and creative, which is why the company's done so well. People will all go that extra mile to help somebody else. We're not silos at all. You know, we're just one very large team. And so it's been really great, and we've managed to sustain that culture now. So if you take Camelot from 1994, when the company was founded, to where we are now, we are quite different from what we were before.
I'd like to go back to a very insightful comment you just made, that you've now discovered, change a culture overnight, but it's whether it's sustainable or not.
Yes. Yeah.
Talk more about that.
Well, as I was saying, at Woolworths it was almost impossible to change it. But what actually happened at Camelot was we'd been to the wall and back, really. We thought we'd lost.
So, sorry, are you saying that, in theory, even Woolworths could change its culture overnight, or it couldn't?
I don't think probably it could. And I think what was...
So some companies have the propensity for that rapid shift and others don't.
I think that's exactly right. And I was lucky in a sense because I'd lost 300 people, which wasn't great, but I had 500 people who desperately wanted it to change. So we went away in groups and we sort of put this new culture together, and the staff helped us develop it, which was great. And then I recruited 300 people. And I was saying to those 300, let me tell you about the culture at Camelot. We're can-do, we're really creative, we're innovative, all the things that we weren't. But I had 300 people coming in who believed that's what it was like, 500 people who wanted it to be like that, and together they made it happen. And it's not changed since. We've evolved, obviously, but the culture is still the same as it was.
And your view about people is... given that circumstance, they've been through a lot, is what? That they want to contribute, they want to win, and they just want someone to step up and be the leader to make that happen?
I think so. They want it to be valued. I think that's the thing. When we lost, people had worked really hard for 6 years, and it always looked as though it was going to disappear and we weren't valued for what we'd done. And people want to be valued. It's a human trait, isn't it?
Culture trumps strategy, doesn't it? Pretty much every time. And even if it doesn't in the short term, it certainly does in the medium and long term. So creating environments that people want to be part of, not only your customers and your suppliers and your, the whole kind of flow through supply chain, but also where people want to work, is pretty fundamental. And I see some of the best leaders I see are people who understand that intuitively, and also who then have the courage to let that show up. It's courage because you actually have to let go of some things. If you're only caught in what you can measure, particularly in what you can measure financially, it's very, very difficult to take some of the risks around authenticity. I mean, some of the things that, frankly, you can't easily measure. And so there's something about trusting to what you know. I mean, intuition, really, emotional intelligence, what I'd call, I don't often say it in a working environment, but it's spiritual intelligence also. Some of those kinds of sensitivities that we have beyond the straight intellect. And I think that leaders who are able to show up with the rest of them below the neck, not just the head, but the heart, the body, the soul, all the things that we embody, are way more inspirational to work with. And people are craving that. They're desperate, actually, for being in an inspirational environment.
Over the years, when I've worked with my clients, I've said to them, well, of course, we'd all like to have an A strategy and an A culture.
Right.
But, how do you measure those two? What score do you give yourself today? And those that end up failing nearly always give themselves an A for strategy and a B or C for culture. It's always the culture that ultimately determines the final outcome. It's never the strategy.
Exactly.
And so that, I think, and how you measure that, or if it is even worth measuring it, is a great question.
Right. And I think also generationally, the next generation really care and will be vocal about culture. And the environment and the values and so forth that show up in the organisations that they want to be part of. And that's increasingly pressing.
When you launched the business with 2 or 3 employees, you created a foundation right from the get-go.
Yes, because of the example of Joe Joffe, who was a friend of ours, Mark and mine, from Allied Dunbar, where we'd had a charitable trust. We gave him a commitment from day one we'd start a charitable trust. I mean, we raised 17,000 or something only in the first year, whereas last year we raised just under 5 million.
What impact has there been on the culture of the organisation over such a long period of time of having that foundation?
That's fascinating. We do an annual survey of our people about the company, and they say the hidden gem at St James's Place is the Charitable Trust. 2 or 3 of them didn't use exactly that wording, but 1 or 2 used that, and they say that is absolutely the culture of SJP. And I think the important thing is it makes your culture within the company better. People are more caring about each other if they're giving, to people less fortunate than themselves. So I feel passionately, if I wasn't doing anything, I'd like to go around every single company and persuade them to have a charitable foundation and say the pleasure it will give and the improvement in your culture will be quite remarkable, because I really do believe that's the case.